Yo, how's it going everyone? So, on this video, this is something completely different that I wanted to get into. So, in this video, I will be talking about my take on my experience with things like mental health, anxiety and depression, things like that basically. So, this is just something that I've wanted to get off my chest for a very, very long time, and that is, you know, having the courage to wanting to be transparent, to speak about these types of things. So, starting off the video, basically, growing up, I always used to think, like, why are so many people like this? Why are so many people so negative? You know what I mean? And as I gotten older, I heard this saying from a famous Viking called Ragnar Lothbrok from the TV show Vikings. And in the show, he says, unhappiness is more common than happiness. Which is facts, because, we all want to be this happy, healthy, positive role model for a lot of people, well, most of us do anyway. But the fact of the matter is that majority of people, almost everyone, is negative. You know what I mean? And I think it's always been like that, especially when I was growing up, because, I was growing up, I was bullied quite a lot due to my Asperger's and basically not having the same interests and hobbies as others. So they just thought, oh well, this guy is boring, so if we don't have anything in common, just go away. You know what I mean? That's how I was treated growing up by a lot of people my age. You know what I mean? So, and that kind of, it put a strain on my mental health for a very long time. You know what I mean? Because I didn't want to be this lone wolf who didn't want to speak to anyone or anything like that. But as I got older, I realised that, being alone, and I think Robin Williams said this, he said that being alone isn't the worst thing. It's being around people that make you feel alone. You know what I mean? And that's what I was doing for a long time. You know what I mean? I was hanging around with people that, I wasn't inspired by, or I didn't look up to, or nothing like that. And they were just put me down mentally and physically. You know what I mean? So, and I always like wondered, why were so many people like this? You know what I mean? And another thing I learned is that, yes, everybody is different individually, but every family is the same. Because they are. Yes, everybody is the same. No, sorry, everybody is different individually, but everybody is the same. Like, every family is the same. Excuse me. Because because I don't know, like, I've never in my life met a single family who has never been through arguments or has never experienced any type of trauma. Like losing someone or having fallen outs or whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? Because I haven't met a single family that's like that, And it made me realise that, everybody is negative. You know what I mean? Because I had this conversation with my friend the other day, and he asked me this really great question. And because I said to him, like, why do you hang around with that guy? He's very negative. And he said to me, who isn't negative nowadays? And I thought to myself, do you know what? That's a really great question. Who isn't negative nowadays? You know what I mean? Because, everybody's negative, really. Even the people that don't show it, even the people that do like to be positive. I mean, yes, I do commend them for that, because it's not easy to do. But deep down, even they're going through something. Like, deep down they are. You know what I mean? And another thing that made me understand why people were like this was when I was a couple of months ago, I was watching this film called Manchester by the Sea. This film right here. Fantastic film. I absolutely love this film. And this film is about Ben Affleck's brother, Casey Affleck, I think his name is, and he plays as this guy called Lee Chadler, who's going through an extremely difficult life, and you know he's basically got every reason to be hating life. He's working a job that he doesn't like, and he's being rude to customers because the customers are being rude to him, making his job even harder. And then he ends up like going to a bar, getting drunk and aggressive to one of the customers at the bar, and he says to them like, "Why were you staring at me over there?" And the customer was like, "I wasn't staring at you. Go take a walk. Go take a walk." And then he punched him right in the face. You know what I mean? And I've been guilty of that myself. Obviously, I haven't gone around in bars starting fights or anything, but I was like that for a long time. Like taking my frustration out on others. Going to bars just to, drink alcohol just to try and take my mind off it. You know what I mean? Because I've done that quite a few times myself. You know what I mean? And it also made me realise why people are like this. You know what I mean? Because if everybody's going through something, and there's a saying, don't judge a book by its cover, which a lot of people do. Do you know what I mean? Because every time someone's getting judged for, could be anything, because everybody's got something to judge. Either it's the way someone looks, or the way they dress, or the way they present themselves, whatever you want to call it, And as soon as somebody gets judged on these types of things, it really gets to them. You know what I mean? Like, it really gets to them, physically and mentally. And, what I've learnt is, going back to the film, when the customer was saying to Lee Chadler, Casey Affleck's character, go take a walk. Instead of saying, go take a walk, I think what he should have said was, what's the matter? Can I help you with anything? Is anything I can support you with? That's what a lot of people don't think about, when someone's being rude or aggressive towards you. They don't think about these things. All they think is, don't speak to me like that or get away. You know what I mean? But in reality, if we could understand what someone's going through first, instead of judging them for their behaviour, it can completely change how that person is. You know what I mean? Like, for example, a few days ago, I was at the store, right? And I won't say names or anything like that, but basically I had a member of staff that was being rude to me because they gave me the wrong order. So I went back and I said, "Excuse me, you've given me the wrong order." And they said, "Oh, well, tough, you're getting it." So instead of getting angry, do you know what I did? Just took the order and I tipped them £10 extra. And do you know what that person did? Smiled right back at me and said, "Do you know what? Here, I'll give you the right order now." They came back and they gave me the right one. And that's all it took. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, we don't need to complain about things just to put other people down. We just need to help them out. We need to understand what they're going through. You know what I mean? Because if we can do that, it can make a huge difference. You know what I mean? Because as soon as I learned, as I got older, that everybody is going through something, and that everybody is negative, it completely took all the pressure off me, and it made me think, do you know what? I'm not alone, because neither is I. We're all going through something at the end of the day. You know what I mean? And I always used to get frustrated when I always used to see, good people, nice people hanging around with bad people, and I thought, this person's going to get you into trouble. You know what I mean? If you carry on hanging around with this person. But and I mean, and that is the case sometimes. But sometimes it can also show support. You know, it can also show empathy towards that person because they might be just being there for them, trying to help them out. Because that's what I've realised as I've gotten older, is someone's presence. Because somebody's presence is a big, big thing nowadays. Like it is. And that's the main reason why I've been so burnt out all my life. Why I've not had the energy to speak up or anything like that. Because, you know, I just felt abandoned. I felt neglected by a lot of people. You know, because, you know, I've had loads of arguments and fallen outs with friends, family members over the years. And, you know, it got to a point where I just had enough. You know what I mean? I don't want to speak to anyone anymore. I'm no longer a people's person. I can't stand humans. I don't want to speak to anyone. That's it. I just want to be a lone wolf for the rest of my life because I'm better off being that way. You know what I mean? But like I said, now that I've realised that everyone is going through something and that I'm not alone, it completely changed my perspective. You know what I mean? And another thing I want to dive into when it comes to on the topic of, you know, abandonment, neglect, is that somebody's presence makes a massive difference nowadays. You know what I mean? Like, it makes a huge, huge difference. Because I remember when I was watching this guest on John Bernthal's podcast, and I just saw the hurt in his voice, the tears come down his eyes when he was saying, you know, somebody's presence, somebody like your dad not being there for you, your mum not being there for you makes a big, big difference. Just being there for them, you know what I mean? Be there, listen, you know what I mean? And it's true, you know, because I was like that myself, you know what I mean? And I always had people saying to me, "Oh, you don't need them in your life. They've got their own life to worry about." Like, no, they don't. You know what I mean? Because you need to ask yourself. Because this is the main thing I've been so frustrated about. Because people always say like, "Oh, I love you, I care about you," and stuff like that. But your words don't mean anything at the end of the day. They don't. You know, there's a reason why they say words speak action. No, sorry, actions speak louder than words. Because they do, you know. Because, yeah, you can say you love them and stuff like that, but it doesn't matter. Because your words don't mean anything. You've got to prove it. Because people just like to jump to conclusions and just assume, oh, because this person said this or said that they mean it. Like, no. You know what I mean? Like, you know, your presence makes a big thing. Because you've got to ask yourself, you know, if you haven't spoken to this person and say like a day or a week, well, a few days or a week, months, or even a year or years, you know, you have to ask yourself, do you really care about this person? Do you actually care about the person if you haven't spoken to them? And the answer to that is probably not. Probably no. You know what I mean? Because yeah, you can say you love them and stuff like that, but if there's no communication, then there is no relationship. And if there is no relationship, then what's the point? Like, what's the point carrying on? You know, pretending that you cared about this person, when in reality you don't. You know what I mean? Because I had so many people say to me, oh, I love you and I care about you, or I hate you, or I don't care about you. But I never took any of that for granted. Because I always knew from day one that words do not mean shit. Because they don't. Because they just don't. You know what I mean? So, you know, just don't neglect anyone in the day. You know, be there for them. Support them. Because a real empathetic individual doesn't judge someone for how they want them to be. You know what I mean? They just accept them for how they are. And that's how you got to be. Like, for example, there's this famous, you know that donkey from Winnie the Pooh? Eeyore, something like that his name is. You know, he was a very depressed donkey. But his friends didn't care. They loved him for him. They were there for him. You know what I mean? And that's how a lot of people have got to be nowadays. You know what I mean? And, you know, because if you're not going to be there for them, due to them not having the energy to speak up, or be or act a certain way that you want them to act. Like, you're not really a good person. Like, you're not, because you don't care about that person's feelings. And if you don't care about that person's feelings, then you have no empathy as a general. No, in general, you know what I mean. So this is what a lot of people need to take into account. And another thing I learned, and I learnt this through, because I remember growing up in school, I always had teachers saying to me, "Josh, stop being happy, it's annoying," or "Stop being miserable, it's not good for you." But as soon as I went into college to do my dream course, I ended up winding up this guy. Well, not intentionally, but I ended up winding up this guy because I was being all happy and cheerful with everyone in the class, basically. And he put a complaint to me, to the tutor, and the tutor said, "Don't do that. Because we don't know what anyone's going through." You know what I mean? And I was like, yeah, but who does this guy think he is? He can't tell me what to do, this and that. And I'm just like, yeah, but at the end of the day, depressed people need time to themselves. You know what I mean? They need more support. They need more empathy. They need more empathy. You know what I mean? And when I did leave college, I actually learnt that myself. And I realised, do you know what? My tutor was so right. You know what I mean? And I thank him so much for, teaching me that. You know what I mean? Because there's not a lot of teachers that, actually teach that. They like to judge a book by its cover. They like to say, "Oh, if you don't want to be here, just don't be here," or if you're not going to put a smile on your face, I don't want to see you. But the tutor I was with at the time, he was like, just be there for them, and be more empathetic towards them. And if you can do that, eventually they will get better and they will change. And that was one of the most powerful and inspiring things I ever learned from someone. You know what I mean? So if we can do that, then we can change someone's life. Do you know what I mean? Because if we just abandon them, if we just neglect them, we're just making their life worse for them. You know what I mean? We're just, you know, we're just making them want to, seek suicide or whatever. You know what I mean? Because that's what happened to me for a long time. You know what I mean? So, always keep this in mind. Is that your presence is a big, big thing. And if you neglect someone, you're pretty much neglecting their life. Do you know what I mean? And if you neglect their life, then you're not really a caring person. You know what I mean? And that's what I've learned. So that's why I'm making this video now. You know what I mean? Because I want people to know that, that I finally have the courage to say to everyone that I've upset or offended over the years that I am truly, truly sorry. And now that I'm back to help others if they ever need to speak to me or anything like that. And another thing I want to get into is that going into the darkest moment of my life, and this was back in September 2024. So this was the year that everything was going downhill for me, because I ended up losing a job that I thought was going to be career changing for me, until I got a complaint by the owner that really upset me, and then I ended up getting sacked for it. And then I ended up having fallen outs and arguments with friends and family. And then during September, I had a really close friend that I had so many good times with, who was always there for me. He ended up going to university. Excuse me. And the first week he ended up going to university, I fell into an extremely deep depression. Basically, depressed as depressed can be. That's basically how I was. Because I just had enough of life in general. You know what I mean? I just didn't see the point continuing anymore. You know what I mean? And on that night, the first night he went to uni, I decided to go to the bar. And this was the night that I was contemplating on taking my own life, basically killing myself. So my intentions were, I went to the bar and I started spending all my money on just shots and vodka and things like that. And then I remember I took a glass bottle with me and I went to the back of the beer garden because the beer garden was empty, as it usually is. So I remember I went back to the beer garden and my intentions were finish this bottle, and then once I finished it, smash the glass across the table and basically stab myself in the neck, as those were my intentions. Because apparently when you're drunk, you can actually bleed more. Apparently, that's what I heard online. And I wanted to get a bit more drunk, so I could hardly feel the pain. So I started drinking a bit more, and then I attempted to smash the glass across the table, and I couldn't do it because I was too drunk. And then all of a sudden, I started getting calls, texts off people, and then I thought, oh, I need to get out of here. So I decided to just, put the bottle down and just go home basically. And then as soon as I left the bar, I collapsed to the floor. And then I woke up the next day in my bedroom, and I was like, oh God, what's happened here? You know what I mean? Because all my clothes were over the floor, massive headache. I had, vomit all over my jeans and stuff like that. And then I got told what happened to me, and I got asked why it happened, and I had messages of people asking if I was okay, and things like that. And then I thought, I would get help, but what's the point? You know what I mean? Because I did go see a doctor after that, but all she said to me was, is there anything that you enjoy doing? That kind of thing. And I said, yeah, but I don't feel like I have much to live for anymore. Because that's one thing a lot of people will say, They will say that, you've got a lot to live for and you just need to be grateful and things like that. But that's not the case, you know what I mean? Because yes, a lot of people do have a lot to live for, but do they have a lot of value to live for? I think the real question is. You know what I mean? Do they have a lot of things that they feel like is valuable to them, that they want to live for? You know what I mean? Because I didn't feel like that. After I had fallen out and arguments with friends and family, and my friend went to uni, I felt like I was out of options. You know what I mean? There was no other reason to continue living. You know what I mean? Because that's what it is. You know what I mean? And if you don't have something valuable to live for, then that's the main thing. You know what I mean? But thankfully now, I have a purpose, and I have things that are helping me continue, living, having the desire to live. You know what I mean? So, and that's just what we need to look for. We need to look for what's valuable to us, and what's the point of us living? That kind of thing. And if we can do that, then we're pretty much saved at that specific moment. You know what I mean? And that's another thing we need to think of. So, yeah, and this is another reason why I'm making this video, because I want to spread this message out and let everyone know that I'm back on the boat and I'm ready to start helping people and supporting people. And again, if anybody is upset or offended for whatever I did or whatever I said, please know I'm truly deeply sorry. And if you ever want to speak to me, I'm here. You know what I mean? I'll always be here no matter what. So yeah, that's my message that I want to put out there. So yeah. And I hope this helps a lot of people. I hope this is a very educational video, and hopefully it encourages everyone to want to soldier on a life, and let them know what my experience with mental health and depression and how it's affected me, and most importantly, what I've learned from it, how it's benefited me. You know what I mean? Because now that I've learned and experienced this, I can finally, I can finally, I finally have the knowledge to know what I need to do in order to help others. So yeah, that's it for today, and hope everyone has a great day. So yeah, peace out.